Emma Parker leaned against the cool railing of the villa balcony in Santorini, her eyes tracing the sun as it dipped slowly into the endless blue of the Aegean Sea. The sky was painted in shades of gold and violet, the colors reflecting on the whitewashed walls of the village below, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of peace. Just days ago, she had been drowning in a mix of disbelief and heartbreak, reading messages on her husband Mark's phone that revealed his emotional betrayal, the kind of silent, creeping distance that had been building for months before she even noticed. The realization had crushed her, shaking the foundation of a life she thought was secure and happy. Boston felt suffocating when she returned home after discovering his secret, every corner of their apartment filled with reminders of what she had lost, and so she booked the trip to Greece almost on impulse, telling herself it was just a break, a chance to clear her mind, but secretly hoping to escape the sharp edges of betrayal and maybe, just maybe, find a part of herself she hadn't seen in years. As she sipped her wine, the cool breeze brushing against her skin, she tried to breathe away the memories of Mark's quiet excuses, his distracted smiles, the nights when she had felt alone even in his presence, and allowed herself to be fully present for the first time, feeling the soft warmth of the evening sun and the rhythm of the waves crashing below. She wandered the villa's terrace, her bare feet against the smooth tiles, letting the scent of salt and jasmine wash over her, each inhale slowly dissolving the tension in her chest. It was there, in that suspended moment of beauty and solitude, that she noticed him, standing a few feet away with a sketchbook tucked under one arm, capturing the sunset with deliberate strokes, the concentration on his face somehow pulling her in. His hazel eyes met hers as if he had seen her thoughts, and he smiled, not flirtatiously, but with quiet recognition, like he understood the weight she carried without needing her to speak a word. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he asked, his voice calm, warm, inviting, as if he were offering a simple truth instead of judgment. Emma nodded, surprised at the softness in her chest, the strange flutter she hadn't felt since before Mark's betrayal had shattered her trust. "I've never seen anything like it," she admitted, and for a moment, she forgot to think about the past, about the lies, about the disappointment that had left her feeling hollow. He laughed softly, a sound that seemed to mix with the wind and the distant waves, and said, "Most people just take pictures. You're actually here." The words struck her unexpectedly, as if someone had pointed out the obvious. She had been alive, breathing, existing, but not really living. Emma realized that she had been holding herself prisoner in her pain, letting the betrayal define her every thought, every sigh, and every restless night, never allowing herself the simple joy of noticing beauty or feeling wonder. Yet now, watching the sky turn pink and gold, hearing the quiet laughter of strangers celebrating life down the narrow cobblestone streets, she felt a small shift, a gentle nudge that maybe the world was wider than her sorrow, that life could hold moments of light even when shadows lingered. The man, who introduced himself as Ethan, a travel writer exploring Greece for inspiration for his next book, seemed entirely unconcerned with her story, yet he offered a subtle empathy, a quiet acknowledgement that she had been hurt and that hurt was valid, and for the first time in weeks, Emma felt a tremor of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel, hope. As they talked, he asked simple questions about her favorite spots in the village, about the food she liked, about the colors of the sea she had noticed on her walks, and she responded freely, surprised by how natural it felt to share without judgment or expectation. With each exchange, her heart felt a little lighter, the tight knot of betrayal loosening just enough to let a new rhythm into her chest, a rhythm she hadn't recognized as her own in months. She found herself laughing quietly at his observations, enjoying his company without overthinking or guarding herself, a sensation that made her almost giddy with relief. Later that evening, she wandered to the edge of the cliff overlooking the water, the sky darkening into shades of deep purple and soft black, lanterns beginning to flicker in the windows of the village below, and realized she had spent hours without once thinking about Mark, without feeling the familiar pang of hurt that had haunted her since discovering his messages. The realization startled her. She had expected the pain to cling like a shadow, to follow her across the ocean, but instead, she felt a fragile, almost shocking sense of freedom. Sitting down on the smooth stone, she watched the waves reflect the lantern's warm glow, and she allowed herself to imagine a life that wasn't defined by betrayal, that wasn't tied to Mark's mistakes or her own doubts, a life where she could be seen and valued for who she was, not just as a partner, but as a person deserving of love, attention, and joy. In the quiet of that moment, the wind brushing her hair and carrying the distant murmur of the village below, she realized that this trip, this escape to Greece, might be exactly what she needed, not just to forget, but to remember herself, to reconnect with the parts of her heart that had been buried under months of heartbreak, disappointment, and disbelief. And as Ethan appeared again, casually leaning against the railing with a fresh sketch in his hands, the corners of his mouth lifting in a gentle, knowing smile, Emma felt a spark of curiosity, a desire to see where this new connection might lead, if only for a little while, and for the first time, she allowed herself to be present in the possibility of happiness, even as the shadow of betrayal lingered faintly behind her, like a memory she was learning to release. Over the next few days, Emma found herself drawn into the quiet rhythm of Santorini life, the way the sun touched the white rooftops each morning and the smell of fresh bread and sea salt mingled in the narrow streets, but most of all, she felt a surprising pull toward Ethan, the travel writer who seemed to appear at the perfect moment whenever she wandered through the village or climbed the cliffs to watch the waves, and though she tried to remind herself that she was here to heal, to escape Mark and his betrayal, she couldn't help but notice the way his presence made the world feel lighter, like laughter could still exist without guilt, like joy could come without apology, and their conversations began innocently, about hidden beaches, local tavernas, and the best time to see the sun kiss the horizon, yet soon they touched deeper subjects, like the kind of people they had been before life had carved lines of hurt and longing into their hearts, and Emma found herself speaking freely about heartbreak, about the sharp sting of discovering Mark's emotional betrayal, the nights she had spent crying silently, wondering if love could ever feel safe again, and Ethan listened without interruption, without judgment, his hazel eyes steady, his gestures patient, creating a space where Emma realized she could breathe without guilt, where her pain could be acknowledged but not allowed to define her, and in those moments, she felt a strange comfort, the kind that made her chest ache with hope and fear at the same time, because she hadn't allowed herself to feel hope in a long time, and now that it had returned, it felt both exhilarating and terrifying, and she noticed how her laughter with Ethan came easily, how her smiles weren't forced, how the corners of her eyes softened as she began to see beauty in moments that weren't tainted by betrayal, and they shared quiet dinners at cliffside cafes where the smell of grilled seafood and fresh herbs mingled with the salty breeze, talking about childhood dreams, favorite books, and what happiness really meant, and though the topics were simple, every word carried weight, like a lifeline thrown to someone learning to swim again in a stormy sea, and Emma noticed how Ethan didn't pry about Mark, didn't ask for details of the betrayal, but instead spoke of freedom, of living fully in the present, of noticing the small joys that often went unseen when life was heavy with pain, and this gentle approach allowed her heart to open in ways she hadn't thought possible, and she marveled at the simple delight of being understood without explanation, of being seen without judgment, and sometimes, when they wandered through quiet streets or along cliffs at sunset, she caught herself stealing glances at him, noticing the curve of his smile, the way his hair caught the sun, the warmth in his eyes when he laughed, and she felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, attraction tempered with respect, admiration without expectation, a delicate connection that made her pulse quicken while also soothing her, because it wasn't about replacing Mark or erasing the past, it was about rediscovering herself, rediscovering the capacity to feel again, to connect again, to hope again, and one evening, while sitting on a low wall overlooking the sparkling waters, Emma confessed a little about her heartbreak, carefully, not spilling everything, just enough to acknowledge the truth that had weighed on her for months, and Ethan's response was gentle, thoughtful, his voice calm but kind, telling her that acknowledging pain was the first step to freeing oneself from it, that mistakes from the past did not have to chain her to sorrow, and as they watched the sun sink behind the horizon, painting the sky in fire and lavender, Emma realized how much she had needed this, someone who could listen, who could laugh with her, who could remind her that life still held color after betrayal, and though part of her felt guilty for feeling happiness while Mark's shadow still lingered in her mind, another part of her recognized that this was survival, this was growth, this was choosing herself in a world that had tried to define her by someone else's mistakes, and each day, as they shared more moments, Emma noticed a shift inside her, a slow unburdening, a quiet resilience forming as she allowed herself to enjoy small adventures, from tasting unfamiliar pastries at street markets to swimming in hidden coves where the water sparkled like liquid sapphire, and she began to recognize her own strength, how she had endured pain and still stood here, capable of joy, capable of connection, capable of hope, and in Ethan's presence, she didn't feel pressure or obligation, only the gentle thrill of discovering friendship that could blossom into something deeper if she allowed it, and it was terrifying because she had promised herself she wouldn't fall too fast, but also freeing because the idea of letting herself feel again was intoxicating, and she realized that while Mark's betrayal had hurt her deeply, it hadn't taken away her ability to live fully, to notice beauty, to respond to kindness, to be open to love again. And then one evening, after wandering the quiet paths of OIA, watching lanterns sway in the soft night breeze, she felt a surge of something she hadn't felt in years, laughter that came naturally, unburdened by the weight of betrayal. And as Ethan's hand brushed hers lightly while pointing out constellations in the sky, she caught her breath, the warmth in her chest spreading in ways that scared her but thrilled her, and she realized that maybe this trip, this unexpected encounter, was not just an escape, but a turning point, a gentle opening of the heart to possibilities she had long denied herself. And just as she allowed herself to smile fully, to feel alive, her phone buzzed in her bag, a message from Mark flashing across the screen. "I made a mistake. Can we talk?" And her fingers trembled as she stared at the words, heart pounding, not out of love or longing, but out of the sudden collision of past and present, the sharp reminder of betrayal meeting the gentle promise of new beginnings, and she felt a strange mixture of dread and relief, because responding could reopen wounds she was only just beginning to heal, but ignoring it would mean choosing herself, choosing the freedom she had found here. And in that moment, looking at the darkening waves, the lanterns reflecting on the water, and Ethan's steady, kind gaze, Emma understood that life was fragile, unpredictable, and full of surprises, and while she couldn't erase the past, she could decide how to move forward, and she realized that maybe, just maybe, happiness wasn't about forgetting heartbreak entirely, but about daring to feel joy again despite it, about letting herself breathe, laugh, connect, and hope. And as she slid the phone back into her bag, she took a deep breath, feeling the warm wind on her face, the soft murmur of the village below, and the quiet, comforting presence of Ethan beside her, and for the first time in a long time, she smiled with her whole heart, not burdened by betrayal, not tethered to pain, but alive in the moment, ready for whatever came next, knowing that sometimes the most unexpected encounters could help you find yourself again, and that even after heartbreak, life could still surprise you with beauty, kindness, and the chance to open your heart slowly, carefully, but fully once more. The next morning, Emma woke to the soft glow of sunlight spilling into her room, the distant sound of waves mingling with the faint calls of vendors setting up their stalls in the village below, and she felt an unusual mix of peace and restlessness, as if her heart were being pulled in two directions at once. One tethered to the memory of Mark and the betrayal that had shaken her so deeply, and the other drawn toward the gentle, grounding presence of Ethan, who had become both her companion and a mirror reflecting the parts of herself she had long neglected. And as she walked along the cliffside path, feeling the warm stones beneath her feet, the salty breeze brushing her face, she realized that she had begun to look forward to these moments of discovery, not just of the island, but of herself. Noticing how her laughter now came more easily, how her eyes lingered on sunsets and waves with genuine awe, and how the thought of Mark's message, which had once triggered pain and confusion, now elicited only a faint shadow of anxiety, tempered by the knowledge that she had a choice in how to respond and whether to allow old wounds to dictate her present. And as she rounded a corner near a secluded cove, she spotted Ethan sketching the rocks where the water lapped gently, and she felt a small thrill at the sight. A reminder that connection could be subtle, unassuming, yet profound, and when he looked up and smiled, a wave of warmth washed over her, not because he promised anything permanent, but because he represented the possibility of joy untainted by betrayal, a quiet companionship that allowed her to exhale after months of holding in grief and disappointment. And as they walked together toward a small cafe perched on the cliff, overlooking the water, their conversation flowed effortlessly. From their favorite memories of travel to the books that had shaped them, to moments of fear and hope that they rarely shared with anyone, and Emma felt an unusual comfort in opening up. sharing the pain she had carried, not seeking advice or sympathy, but simply acknowledgement, and Ethan gave that to her with the patience of someone who understood that healing was not linear, that scars did not need to be erased, only accepted and integrated into the story of who she was becoming. And over lunch, as the sunlight danced on the water and the soft chatter of locals filled the air, Emma noticed how her heart responded to the subtle gestures, the small attentions Ethan offered without demanding anything in return, and she realized that this was unlike any connection she had known before, gentle, grounding, and unexpectedly transformative. And though part of her worried that she might be moving on too quickly, another part of her recognized that life was too short to be held hostage by betrayal, that joy was not a betrayal of her past, but an affirmation of her resilience and self-worth. And as they wandered the cobblestone streets later, discovering quiet corners and hidden stairways lined with flowers, Emma felt a thrill of freedom, a sense of possibility she hadn't allowed herself to feel since discovering Mark's messages, and she marveled at how simple pleasures, a shared laugh, the scent of fresh bread, the colors of the sea, could feel so profoundly restorative, as if each moment with Ethan was a gentle reminder that the world could still surprise her with beauty. That connection could be pure, unforced, and deeply meaningful, and yet, even in this growing sense of freedom, the thought of Mark lingered, a quiet question mark at the edge of her mind, reminding her that the past was not erased, only reframed, and she found herself contemplating what it truly meant to forgive, not him, but herself, for the pain she had internalized, and to recognize that moving forward did not diminish her love for what once was, but affirmed her right to be happy in what could be. And as evening approached, Ethan suggested they attend a local festival, a celebration of lights in the old harbor, and Emma hesitated, imagining the lanterns glowing against the water, the laughter of strangers filling the night, and she realized that this event symbolized more than just a fun evening. It represented a crossroads, a chance to step fully into her own narrative, to embrace joy in the presence of uncertainty. And when they arrived, the harbor was alive with music, lanterns drifting on the water, families and travelers mingling, and the scent of food and candles creating a sensory tapestry that wrapped around her heart like a warm blanket. And Emma allowed herself to be present, walking alongside Ethan, feeling the thrill of laughter and conversation, noticing the way his eyes caught the light and how effortlessly he navigated the festival with kindness toward everyone. And she realized that this experience, though seemingly simple, was transformative. A reminder that life after betrayal could be rich, vibrant, and full of unexpected connections. And she felt a growing certainty that while she could not change the past, she could choose to let go of the weight it carried, to release resentment and fear, to cultivate joy and curiosity once more. And in a quiet moment, as they paused by the water's edge, watching a lantern float and catch the reflection of the stars, Ethan's hand brushed hers, a fleeting touch, yet it carried a depth of understanding and encouragement, a silent acknowledgement that healing could coexist with attraction, that hope could be nurtured gently without forcing it. And Emma felt a shiver of excitement, a mixture of nervousness and anticipation, realizing that this trip had become a journey not just across a stunning landscape, but through her own heart, a chance to reclaim the parts of herself that betrayal had obscured. And she understood that the power to define her future rested not in the hands of someone who had hurt her, but in her own willingness to embrace life again, to notice beauty, to respond to kindness, to connect, and to allow herself, slowly, carefully, to open to love in its many forms, whether in friendship, in quiet admiration, or in the delicate stirrings of something more. And as the festival reached its peak, lanterns floating like tiny stars across the harbor, music drifting on the night breeze, and the soft murmur of conversation all around, Emma closed her eyes for a moment, letting the gentle sounds, the warmth, and the light wash over her. And when she opened them again, she realized that the heaviness she had carried for months had lifted just enough to create space for possibility, for new memories, for gentle joy that was entirely her own. And she felt an unexpected courage, a quiet resolve, knowing that the path ahead would not be simple or predictable, but it would be hers to navigate, free from the shadows of betrayal, yet fully informed by the lessons of heartbreak. And as she looked at Ethan, standing quietly beside her, his gaze soft and encouraging, she allowed herself to smile fully, not cautiously, not guardedly, but freely, understanding that the freedom she felt in that moment was a gift she could nurture, a seed of hope that could grow into strength, confidence, and even love. Again, and she realized that she had begun to choose herself, to trust her instincts, to embrace her own joy, and that perhaps, after all she had endured, the most radical act of healing was simply to allow herself to feel alive again, fully, openly, and beautifully, and in that instant, surrounded by the shimmering lights, the laughter of strangers, and the steady, reassuring presence of someone who saw her for who she truly was, Emma Parker understood that the heart could mend, that connection could be gentle, and that even after betrayal, life could surprise her with moments of profound beauty, warmth, and the intoxicating possibility of love rediscovered. The night of the festival arrived like a dream, with lanterns drifting on the calm harbor waters and the air filled with the soft scent of honey pastries and roasted olives, and Emma felt her heart pounding, not with fear, but with anticipation, a flutter that reminded her she was truly alive for the first time in months. She and Ethan wandered among the crowds, their fingers brushing occasionally, the warmth from those brief touches spreading like sunlight through her chest, and every smile exchanged, every shared laugh, made her feel more connected to the present and more distant from the pain she had carried for so long, the shadow of Mark's betrayal seeming to fade with each step, replaced by a delicate sense of freedom she hadn't thought possible. And as they paused by a lantern stall, watching dozens of small lights float skyward, she noticed how the reflection danced across Ethan's eyes, and she felt an unexpected calm, a reassurance that moments like this were rare, precious, and entirely hers to embrace. And as they walked along the edge of the harbor, she realized that the emotions swirling inside her were complex: gratitude for this beautiful escape, nostalgia for what she had lost, and excitement for what might lie ahead, yet none of it felt heavy or constraining, only real, alive, and vividly present. And when they reached a quiet corner away from the festival's music, Ethan pulled out his sketchbook and began drawing, not just the scene, but capturing the soft expression on Emma's face as the lanterns glowed behind her, and she felt her chest tighten with a warmth that was unfamiliar yet comforting, a reminder that connection could be gentle, patient, and meaningful, and she realized that healing didn't always roar like a storm. Sometimes, it arrived quietly, through laughter, attention, and understanding. And as the night deepened, she wandered to the water's edge, watching a lantern float slowly across the surface, reflecting thousands of tiny lights, and in that moment, she made a silent promise to herself, not to Mark, not to anyone else, but to her own heart, that she would allow herself to embrace happiness, to seek joy, and to trust that she was capable of love again, even if it looked different, even if it arrived slowly. And as she turned, Ethan was beside her, his gaze soft and encouraging, and she felt the stirrings of hope mingled with the lingering sadness of the past, realizing that the two could coexist, that acknowledging betrayal did not mean being bound by it, and she understood that her power lay in choice, in deciding that her heart deserved light, attention, and warmth, and that the life she imagined could still be beautiful despite past hurts. And together, they wandered the lantern-lit streets, sampling local sweets, listening to musicians play soft melodies, and sharing quiet stories, their conversation flowing easily, full of gentle curiosity, questions, and insights. And Emma noticed how natural it felt to confide, to laugh, to be herself without pretense or worry, and she felt a sense of liberation that surprised her, a freedom from judgment, expectation, and even guilt, as if the island itself had conspired to give her permission to breathe, to heal, and to open her heart again. And when they paused on a low stone wall overlooking the shimmering harbor, Ethan gestured to the lights reflecting on the water. And she felt a surge of gratitude, not just for the beauty around her, but for the kindness, patience, and understanding he had shown, for the way he had listened without pressing, for the way he had allowed her space to process, feel, and slowly, carefully, rediscover herself. And she realized that this connection wasn't about replacing the past, or pretending betrayal hadn't happened, but about choosing to live fully in the present, to notice love, joy, and companionship when it came gently, without expectation or pressure. And as they watched the final lanterns rise into the night sky, she felt tears prick her eyes, not of sadness, but of relief, of recognition, of a heart opening after months of wait and pain. And she thought of Mark's message again, but this time it felt distant, almost irrelevant, a reminder that her life was hers to shape, her choices hers to make, and responding or not responding would not define her worth or happiness. And in that realization, Emma felt a Profound lightness, a sense of empowerment, a quiet courage that had been buried under months of disappointment, and she understood that letting go of resentment and embracing the present did not diminish her experiences, but honored them by allowing her to grow, and she saw that love and connection could exist without compromise to her own peace, that attraction could be gentle, that friendship could be healing, and that joy could bloom in small, unassuming moments. And as she stood beside Ethan, feeling the soft night breeze, the faint music in the background, the lanterns floating like tiny stars across the harbor, she recognized that she was beginning to forgive herself for holding on too tightly, for loving fully despite betrayal, and for allowing herself to hope again, and a thrill ran through her as she realized that happiness was no longer something distant or forbidden, but something she could grasp, nurture, and cherish, and that this trip, this escape to Greece, had not only offered her beauty and adventure, but had shown her the power of connection, of gentleness, and of reclaiming her own life. And as the festival wound down, the harbor quieting, and the lanterns flickering their last reflections on the water, she and Ethan lingered, sharing a final smile, a gentle promise of continued friendship, laughter, and perhaps, in time, something deeper. And Emma understood, fully and quietly, that the heart could heal, that she could move forward without bitterness, and that sometimes the most profound liberation came not from grand gestures or dramatic revelations, but from choosing to step lightly into the world, to embrace beauty, kindness, and love, however slowly it arrived. And as she finally walked back to the villa, the night air cool against her skin, the scent of jasmine clinging faintly to her clothes, she carried with her a sense of peace, freedom, and hope, knowing that her life had shifted, that she had found a safe harbor within herself, and that even after betrayal, the world could still offer moments of magic, gentle connection, and the promise of new beginnings. And for the first time in months, Emma Parker felt fully present, fully alive, and ready to let her heart explore the possibilities of happiness, love, and self-discovery, without fear, without guilt, and entirely on her own terms.